Minister Davidge, the Imperial Minister of Logistics, tapped at the console of his computer, flipping through screen after screen of numbers arranged in columns, tables, graphs, and charts. The entirety of the Empire was represented in those numbers. Every citizen, every soldier, every subjugate, and every slave on every world. Every ship in every fleet, as well as all the resources produced across all the systems and sectors under Imperial control, was accounted for in mind-numbing detail and accuracy. The totalitarian rule of the Emperor had led to a very efficient and organized system of inventories and censuses that measured everything under his control. And though he was gone, much to Minister Davidge's relief, the bureaucratic network he'd installed still remained. The screens and screens of numbers were the lifeblood Davidge needed. Without accurate, up-to-date data, he couldn't do his job. And in his mind, it was clearly the most important job in the Empire. Logistics, on a meta-scale, were the be-all and end-all of the Empire's survival. Resources and manpower dictated supplies and labor, which dictated the potential production and expected consumption of everything. Without him, the Empire had no plan to guide its course. Without him, the Minister of War wouldn't know how many ships or troops to send to each sector, or which worlds were worth fighting for, and which weren't worth the resources to defend. Even the Dark Council's members relied on him to give them a sense of the relative strength of the Empire compared to the Republic. Unfortunately, the minister lacked hard numbers on the Republic. Ever since the collapse of Imperial intelligence, data on the enemy had come from estimates, assumptions, and guesswork. It added variance to his equations, and Minister Davidge hated variance. It required him to provide predictions for both high and low ends of the spectrum, doubling his workload as he offered up predictive models tracking the ebb and flow of the galactic war. Even using the lowest estimates of Republic resources, the truth was inescapable. The tide had turned against the Empire, and if something didn't radically change over the next few years, their defeat was inevitable. It was simple math. The minister finished up his final review of the data, gathered his report, and stood from his desk, stretching to loosen his cramped and tired muscles. He'd been huddled over the chair for nearly 12 hours, but Darth Marr had presented him with a question, and Davidge needed to be sure of the answer before he replied. Confident in his analysis, he turned and headed to the locked Durasteel door in the back of his office. He punched in the 16-digit code to unlock it, stepped inside, and sealed the door behind him. He moved quickly over to the communications console in the center of the room and activated the black cipher to send out an encrypted message to Darth Marr. The Sith Lord answered immediately. Clearly, he'd been waiting for Davidge's call.
"My lord," the minister said, "I've reviewed the situation in the Boranall system as you commanded."
"I assumed as much when I saw your call,"
Marr answered, his voice calm and cold as the grave. Davidge suppressed an urge to shudder. He didn't like dealing with the Dark Council. The Sith Lords were strange creatures beyond his comprehension. They were driven by emotion and passion, rather than logic and careful analysis. They often relied on visions and prophecy gleaned through the Force, allowing some mystical, unquantifiable power to guide their actions, rather than the undeniable truth of numbers. And sometimes they stubbornly refused to believe what he tried to tell them, especially when he delivered news they didn't want to hear. Marr was better than some of the others. He didn't rage and scream at Davidge when he didn't get the answer he sought, like Ravage, and he didn't seem to be eviscerating the minister with his eyes like Mortis. Most important, Marr understood that the minister's projections were not guarantees. Unforeseen variables could alter the equation, rendering the minister's numbers obsolete. But there was still something unsettling about the icy calm with which Marr always addressed him.
"What is your analysis?"
Marr pressed, and Davidge realized the Sith had been waiting for him to give his report.
Given the estimated level of Republic-backed resistance and the growing tide of anti-Imperial sentiment among the native population, we should abandon our campaign in the Boranall system.
There are 3 habitable worlds in that system. Nearly 20 billion people.
Yes, my lord, but none of the planets has the abundance of resources necessary to offset the losses we will inevitably sustain if we try to keep the population under Imperial control.
What's the loss ratio?
Extrapolated over 6 months, there is a net 0.2% reduction in total Imperial output if we let the system go.
And if we try to hold it?
Conservative estimates put the loss at 0.4%.
After a moment, he hastily added,
In the worst-case scenario, losses could hit 0.7%.
To some, the numbers might sound small, but Davidge knew Marr was wise enough to understand the incredible scope of even 0.02% of the Empire's total resources.
The cost is high, but the Boranall system is not the only place in the Empire threatening to break away from our control. Crushing this uprising will send a message to other systems.
Of course, my lord,
Davidge said, though silently he sighed. He understood Marr's reasoning. Expend extra resources on the Boranall system in the hope that it would offset future losses. But in the Minister's experience, such a plan rarely worked. Anti-Imperial sentiment would still rise up in other systems, fed and fueled by the Republic and their promises of liberation. They would never recoup the extra few tenths of a percent it would cost them to hold the system. In Davidge's mind, this is how the Empire would fall. Not in some epic battle, but by tiny margins bleeding away. A death of 1 million microscopic cuts. But he dared not argue with Darth Marr.
I will arrange to have one of our nearby fleets send reinforcements to the system, the Minister said.
I believe Darth Marr is still in that sector. The Ascendant Spear's arrival should put a quick end to the uprising.
The Minister fought back another sigh. He was all too familiar with Darth Marr and her methods. Whenever the Ascendant Spear was brought into a conflict, casualties and collateral damage increased exponentially. There was no doubt in his mind that the loss ratio would now push toward the highest of his estimates. Against his better judgment, the Minister decided to speak up.
I'm still trying to absorb the cost of Darth Marr's intervention at Larator. The loss of Gravis's fleet has negatively impacted our projections. In this case, it might be better if you ordered someone else to go.
Darth Marr is a member of the Dark Council now. She does not take orders from me, or from you.
Forgive me, my lord. I meant no offense.
Choose your words more carefully when you contact Darth Marr to request her assistance in this matter.
Davidge understood numbers better than people, but it was obvious what Marr was hoping to accomplish. It was well known that he had supported the Falline's candidacy from the beginning, and having the Minister of Logistics personally petition Darth Marr for aid in the Boranall system would further legitimize her new position. And persuading her to undertake a mission in a remote system would keep her and the Ascendant Spear away from the machinations of any other members of the Dark Council who might be looking to recruit her allegiance, at least for a while. It wasn't the first time the Minister had been forced to bow to the politics of the Dark Council. At least this time the cost to the Empire was less than it had been on other occasions.
I understand, my lord. I will contact her at once.
Try to be convincing when you ask for her help,
Marr warned before disconnecting the signal.